All the nations before us, they rise, they fall, and they rot from within. But every now and then, a man rises, not to chase the world, but to challenge it. That man was Phil Robertson. He wasn't just a TV star or a duck-hunting redneck in camo. He was a living contradiction. Wild but wise, blunt but faithful, broken but born again. And now, he's gone. At 79, the patriarch of Duck Dynasty took his final breath surrounded by family, after battling Alzheimer's with the same fire he brought to every fight in life. His passing wasn't just the end of a man. It felt like the closing of a chapter in American culture. This isn't just a tribute. This is a reckoning, a deep dive into the life, rebellion, redemption, and controversy of a man who didn't just survive the storm, he became it. Welcome to the story of Phil Robertson. Before the beards, before the fame, before the duck calls, there was just Phil, a poor kid from Vivian, Louisiana, born April the 24th, 1946, the fifth of 7 children, raised without electricity, plumbing, or privilege. His home wasn't a house, it was a hunting ground. If they wanted to eat, they fished. If they wanted to stay warm, they chopped wood. Life didn't hand the Robertsons anything. They earned it, every bite, every inch. Phil didn't grow up watching cartoons or playing with toys. His toys were rifles, fishing poles, and traps. While the world modernized, he stayed primal, learning lessons in stillness, silence, and self-reliance. And those muddy woods? They weren't just home. They were a classroom, one that taught Phil how to live with nothing so he could later stand for everything. He didn't just survive poverty, he carried it like a badge of honor. Phil wasn't just a woodsman, he was an athlete. By the time he got to Louisiana Tech, he was the starting quarterback, playing ahead of a kid named Terry Bradshaw, who'd go on to win 4 Super Bowls. Coaches saw greatness. Scouts were watching. The NFL door swung open wide, but Phil looked at that shiny future and walked away without hesitation. To most people, that was madness. Who turns down fame and fortune for a duck blind and a dirt road? But Phil wasn't like most people. He didn't want a mansion. He wanted misty mornings and muddy boots. This was the first moment the world saw what he was made of. He wasn't chasing dreams. He was choosing truth, even if that meant giving up everything others would kill to have. Before the preacher, before the Bible, before the fame. Phil Robertson was a man spinning out of control. His 20s were a whirlwind of rage, alcohol, and destruction. He drank hard, fought harder, and ran from anything resembling peace. He cheated on Miss K, lost jobs, and spiraled so deep even his family feared the man he was becoming. He wasn't just lost, he was dangerous. The man who once held a football now held a bottle, slurring his way through bar fights and broken promises. His marriage? Hanging by a thread. His soul? Almost gone. And then, rock bottom. A preacher walked into the bar where Phil was drowning his demons. Instead of throwing fists, Phil listened. Something cracked open. A seed was planted, and everything began to change. Phil didn't just clean up, he surrendered. He gave up the bottle, the rage, the darkness. He found Jesus not in a church pew, but in the wreckage of his own broken life. He was baptized in the presence of Miss K and their sons. The man who once cursed the world now opened every day with prayer. He didn't just become a believer, he became a warrior for faith. Miss K had waited, she had prayed, and now the man she once feared came home gentle, focused, and faithful. Their love, nearly destroyed, began again with new roots, deeper, stronger, unshakable. Phil's redemption was raw, real, and messy. He never pretended to be perfect, but he lived proof that no one is too far gone to be found. His testimony would soon become his greatest weapon. With his faith restored and his family back, Phil got to work, but not in a skyscraper or a boardroom, in a shed. A small wooden shed in the backwoods of Louisiana, surrounded by ducks, trees, and second chances. In 1972, he carved his first duck call out of Louisiana cedar. He didn't plan to start an empire, he just wanted something that worked better in the field. But word got out, and hunters listened. One by one, orders came in. The duck call wasn't flashy, but it was real, just like Phil. By the 1980s, Duck Commander was more than a hobby. It was a thriving family business built on grit, prayer, and persistence. And it wasn't just about calls, it was about values. His sons joined in, his faith guided every step, and slowly, without chasing it, Phil Robertson became a name hunters respected, and America would soon never forget. 2012 changed everything. A&E launched Duck Dynasty, and within weeks, it was a phenomenon. Millions tuned in, not just to see ducks, but to see a family that prayed before meals and stood firm in faith. The Robertsons weren't actors, they were themselves. Beards, boots, Bibles. Fans didn't just watch the show, they felt it. It was different, it was raw, it was unapologetically American. Phil became the face of it all. Camo hat, long beard, slow southern drawl, and wisdom that cut through the noise. While most shows sold shock value, Duck Dynasty sold conviction, humor, and heart. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a movement. In a world chasing trends, Phil stood for tradition. In a culture of noise, he stood for silence. And in a society that blurred lines, he drew them bold and clear. Phil Robertson wasn't made for political correctness. He was a man of conviction, not compromise. So when GQ magazine sat him down in 2013, they didn't get a sanitized TV version, they got Phil, unfiltered. He spoke on sin, morality, and the Bible the way he always had, raw and direct. But this time, the backlash came fast. A&E suspended him, corporate sponsors backed away, and headlines exploded across the country. For most celebrities, that would have been the end. But Phil wasn't looking for approval. He was looking for truth. And his fans, they weren't silent. In just 9 days, public pressure forced A&E to reverse its decision. That moment wasn't just a controversy, it was a turning point. Phil had become more than a reality star. He was now a symbol of resistance to a culture that many believed had lost its backbone. And he stood tall in the storm. When the cameras dimmed, Phil didn't disappear. He just went deeper. He wrote best-selling books, part memoir, part manifesto. His words inspired not just duck hunters, but broken people looking for redemption. He launched podcasts from the same woods where he built his legacy. No fancy studio, just truth, timber, and a microphone. His voice reached millions, preaching scripture, telling stories, and baptizing listeners in belief. Phil didn't chase fame anymore, he chased souls. His home became a ministry. His table, a place of healing. People came from across the country to meet the man behind the beard and left with something eternal. Through it all, he stayed rooted, still hunting, still praying, still warning the world that faith wasn't outdated, it was under attack. And he wasn't afraid to be the man who reminded everyone what matters. Even warriors fade. In 2024, the news hit Phil Robertson had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The man whose mind had once shaped empires and souls alike was slowly being dimmed by one of the cruelest diseases imaginable. But true to form, he didn't hide. He didn't retreat. He kept podcasting. He kept preaching. He kept showing up, because that's what Phil did. Even when his memory slipped, his mission stayed razor sharp. His family watched as the strong patriarch began to slow. But they didn't mourn while he lived. They rallied. Miss K, his rock through decades of chaos and grace, never left his side. They prayed. And in those quiet months, something sacred happened. Phil wasn't defined by what he forgot. He was defined by what he still held tight. Faith, family, purpose. And when the end came, it came peacefully, with prayer in the air and love in the room. On May 25th, 2025, the voice of the backwoods fell silent. Phil Robertson passed away at 79, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. He left this world the way he lived in it, anchored in faith, flanked by family. His funeral wasn't flashy. No cameras, no spectacle. just a handmade cedar casket, a worn Bible, his favorite duck call, and a camo cap placed gently on top. But beyond those walls, the world mourned. Tributes poured in from governors, pastors, celebrities, and ordinary people whose lives he'd changed. Franklin Graham called him a giant of faith. Sarah Huckabee Sanders called him an American original. The Robertson family announced a public memorial in Monroe, Louisiana, so fans could say goodbye. Instead of flowers, they asked for donations to Phil's favorite causes: All God's Children, May Fund, and One Kingdom. Phil Robertson didn't just build a brand, he built a blueprint for anyone who's ever felt too broken, too far gone, or too out of place in a world chasing all the wrong things. He showed us what it looks like to stand your ground when the world begs you to kneel. He wasn't flawless, he never claimed to be. But in a culture of filters and fakery, Phil was real, blunt, bold, and unashamed. He told his truth, took the heat, and kept on talking. And somehow, through the controversy and the chaos, millions listened. He left behind more than a company, more than a TV show. He left behind a trail of changed lives, fathers who went home, sons who got baptized, strangers who turned back to faith, because a bearded man in camo reminded them it wasn't too late. And maybe that's the real legacy, not the duck calls, but the simple fact that Phil Robertson believed you could go from darkness to light, and that if he could do it, so could you.